Welcome back to Finding the Truth series, where I present a step-by-step guide on how to find the truth of our existence. This is part 5 of the series, and in this part I will be trying to refute or respond to common atheist arguments. The first argument is where atheists say that something can come from nothing. An atheist by the name of Lawrence Krauss wrote that we have discovered that all signs suggest a universe that could and plausibly arise from a deeper nothing, involving the absence of space itself. In the end of the day, he uses the word could and plausibly. He's not even sure himself. This is not a good argument because you can't find any example in reality where you see things popping out of nothing. If you were to ask anyone, no one would consider this to even be possible. And it doesn't address how the laws of physics exist, how anything exists in nature. And we never say that 1 is equal to 0, which is the same thing as this argument. As such, this really doesn't solve any questions. It doesn't really have any bearings in reality. And so we give no weight to this argument, and anyone seeking the truth should not be affected by this argument at all. Some atheists also say that natural selection, evolution, and abiogenesis explains everything. Well, that's not necessarily the case because natural selection is a mechanism, and it's a plausible mechanism at that. It's a theory, meaning it's not entirely proven. In the end of the day, natural selection, evolution, and abiogenesis are rather just part of the chain of dependencies. It's just a link in the chain. So therefore, it doesn't really answer questions where everything came from, and we want to get to the very crux of the matter and not just discuss a link in the chain itself. Now, atheists have many straw man arguments. For example, they'll try to equate the independency we concluded in our previous episodes to fairies and spaghetti monsters. This is a very common tactic, and that's the only reason why I'm actually bringing this up. It's because a lot of atheists will actually just straw man the theistic position. However, what we concluded was that everything came from an independent and unchanging first cause. Fairies and spaghetti monsters or whatever, and anything conceivable by the human mind is actually dependent. Like the meatball is dependent on meat, and the spaghetti is dependent on, say, wheat. So it's really just a straw manning. It's basically equating dependent things to an independency. However, these two things are very much distinct. So this argument, it does not have any weight to it. Atheists also have very hasty generalizations. They'll make sarcastic comments such as, which God are we talking about? Are we talking about the Christian God, the Muslim God, or like the Hindu God? And this will usually come in some sort of sarcastic manner. However, this is actually just a jumping to a preconceived notion. It's a hasty generalization. It disregards the original argument that we deduced in our previous videos. We have not mentioned any specific God in the series. Rather, we have logically established the need for independency, which we have labeled as God. Another common argument is God of the gaps. In this argument, atheists say that there is a gap in the logic when theists try to prove God. For example, they'll say we cannot explain it as in a phenomenon, therefore God exists. And so there's a gap in the logic. However, our logic in our previous videos, you could refer back to them, have no such gaps. We use the term God to simplify our logical conclusion, which was that an independent, unchanging first cause needs to exist. And we did not specify a specific God. Rather, we only just used a term to define our logical conclusion. Another very common argument that atheists use is that the universe or multiverse is independent and infinite. This is a claim and it's not proven. However, the redshift and the Big Bang theory actually undermines this claim because it shows that the universe is limited. It used to expand, and that means that it was a smaller at some point in time, and it was a singularity at a very distant past. The multiverse theory is not proven as a fact either. The multiverse could also just be another link in the chain of infinite regression, so in the end of the day, it doesn't actually answer our question about where everything came from. The universe and the multiverse are composed of dependent things. The universe can be measured, i.e. the distance and the time, etc. And so a sum of dependent things cannot actually equal independency. And since the universe and the multiverse are actually just sums of dependent things, it can never actually be that independency that we were referring to in our conclusion from the previous videos. So this argument also does not hold any weight. Atheists also say the laws and observations in our reality might not be the same outside of the universe or before time began. This again is a claim, and you can't really prove it. And obviously, when we live our lives based on our observations. If you deny that, then you live a life of double standards. So obviously, when we make our conclusions that we've made in the previous videos, we make it based on our observations, because that's what we have to go by. And we try to live our lives based on observations. So if an atheist comes and tells you this argument, then essentially they're living a life of double standards, because everything that they do is based on observations. So when we conclude a matter, we look at the observations around us, and this tells us what we need to know about life. What occurs outside of this is really not something we could say or talk about, and so it doesn't really lead to any answers in the first place, and you're just left to just go about your days without any answers. So this argument is not very pragmatic, it's not really realistic, and it has a double standard to it. Another argument that atheists have is that they say that the universe is self-subsisting, and they also say that the universe is in a cyclical, endless cycle of birth and destruction. This theory assumes that dependencies can exist in and of themselves in a cyclical pattern, i.e., they are self-subsisting. However, this is also not proven, and there's no observable example of such a thing. Have you ever seen anything living forever or subsisting by itself forever without being dependent on anything else? Well, I doubt you have. And then you can also ask the question, how did this circle of dependency come about in the first place? It can't just pop out of nothing. There had to be some sort of beginning to it, but how did that occur? And again, we have to come back to the fact that an independency is the basis for any such thing to occur. Now, the atheists also have these two arguments. The string theory. They say the string theory explains everything. Well, the string theory is also a theory, and it actually is just another part of the chain of dependency. For example, I could ask, where did the strings come from? So, because they're also dependent. So it doesn't solve the chain of dependency, and it's also part of the infinite regression. And then we also have the argument where atheists say that reality can be explained by randomness and chance. Well, I would actually argue this by saying that randomness does not actually exist. Rather, randomness results from our limited understanding of a phenomenon. What we consider random is actually very organized and very much abiding to specific laws and equations and things like that. It is only through our ignorance and our lack of knowledge in these things that we consider anything to be random. Now, this argument is a bit complicated. It talks about A theory of time versus the B theory of time. Atheists say that the world might be based on the B theory of time, which basically states that the passing of time is an illusion, and it's just based on our observation, the human perspective, that people have the idea of past, present, and future. Whereas the A theory of time says that past, present, and future are realities, and that time actually passes. The B theory of time assumes that time is eternal, and there's an eternal timeline, and everything is kind of happening at the same time. Everything occurs at once. However, I have to remind you that we are using our observations, the human observations, to arrive at the truth. And we note the passing of time. When we press the button on a stopwatch, we see that the stopwatch continues. When we have an apple, we note that it rots over time. So obviously we're going to go by our observations. That is how we're going to get to the conclusion, how we're going to get to the truth. So this theory really just makes things too complicated. In the end of the day, we want to use our observation, and the A theory of time is a theory that makes the most sense. And sure, our assumptions are based on the A theory of time, but most people live their lives based on the A theory of time. And when we're living our lives based on the A theory of time, we're also going to be basing our truth based on the things that we observe. So again, the B theory of time might be an interesting theory, and it might be the case, but how does this really help us in finding the truth? It really doesn't. And I could argue that if time is eternal, but is also dependent. How did time come about in the first place? In the end of the day, it is essentially or inherently dependent. So that means it needs something independent to exist in the first place. So again, the B theory of time really just comes back to our conclusion, because we need an independency to exist. And that's how we respond to this argument. In conclusion, we say that, again, the most sensible and logical conclusion to the existence of dependencies and change is the existence of an unchanging independency. We can't use any of the alternative arguments that the atheists give for the reasons that I mentioned, such as a lot of them being part of the chain of dependency, or they're just another theory, which isn't exactly proven to be true. And also the fact that these theories have no examples in reality. You can't find anything popping out of nothing, and you can't find anything that is independent in and of itself. As such, the most logical conclusion is what's shown here on the screen. I hope this makes sense, and I will see you in the next video.